Sam Fender is a UK artist who has been doing pretty well for himself over the past few years, landing some high charting singles in the UK, a well-received debut album, a pretty respectable reputation from your rock fans, your real rock fans, real music rock fans, and also somehow made it onto Radio X's best 100 songs, British songs of all time, despite only being around for like a few years. So to hit that level already is pretty crazy. Not sure I would quite put him up there yet, but you know, Radio X is Radio X and they'll just keep doing what they do. I was surprised to actually like his debut album. I listened to it, thought it was pretty solid, was interested to see where he'd go. My throat is going, but his second album here, his follow-up album, 17 Going Under, is pretty much like not the same, but it's what I expected from Sam Fender, if you get what I mean. He certainly entered more of the Heartland rock territory. I think a lot of artists at the moment seem to be jumping into this sound pretty seamlessly as well. I wouldn't necessarily say it's an easy sound to recreate, but it seems as though any artist can do an album like this and generally do pretty well with it, to be fair. I wouldn't say it's like a huge resurgence or like, you know, the biggest new trend that's going on at the moment, but I think a lot of rock artists are wanting to lean into this more like earnest, earthly, natural sounding rock music because it seems to appeal to a wide audience, and generally, like I say, you can't really get it that badly wrong, so it's a pretty safe bet, I think. And this album generally feels like a pretty safe bet. I think it's actually pretty good. I was pretty impressed with how he was selling these songs for the most part, but you know, I wouldn't necessarily say, you know, it's a progression that is bold or is going to be something that I'll be like thinking about in 5 years time, but I at least got some really strong tracks out of this, and I can see that there's still potential in Sam to put out something really good. I think the title track is one of the best tracks here. His delivery is really strong. The whoa-whoa-whoas really work as well in the song. You know, it's sometimes stuff like that can be a bit generic, but I think he actually pulls it off quite nicely. It feels relatively anthemic, and I think next year's festival bills will certainly want Sam Fender on it to play a song like this, because I can definitely see this going down very well in that kind of audience. It's incredibly Bruce Springsteen inspired though. Like, this opening track is such a dead ringer for classic Bruce. Like I say, Heartland rock at the moment seems to be a genre that many people want to try and bring back in their sound, and The Boss is going to be hard to top because it's very difficult to make, you know, an album on the quality of some of his best. Speaking of artists that want to try and be Bruce, The Killers is very much living in the track Getting Started, reminding me so much of that last, no, not the last Killers album, the one before, the 2021. This track could easily slot into the album there. There's a nice steady approach to this one. It doesn't feel like, you know, he's rushing anything, and he's just taking his time. It's a pretty chill track. It sounds good, even if it does remind me of other artists, and I think that's what Sam could probably work on in future. What is his niche? Because at the moment, listening to songs like this, I like it, but I'm just too busy thinking of, you know, half a dozen other artists that have done this kind of thing in the last few years alone. But it's tracks like Get You Down, which I think work quite nicely because there's this sax inclusion. I think the guitar sounds pretty gruff on this one as well. There's just a bit more of an emphasis on, you know, added instruments coming through that just make the track sound a bit more full of life. And I think he probably could utilize this kind of thing a lot more. Paradigms has got to be the best track just for that piano lead. It is so catchy. The keys are just ringing in your ears. It's like, it sounds great. It sounds very much Bleachers-esque, and I really like the most recent Bleachers album, as you guys may remember from my review. So, you know, that's only a positive that I can be throwing out there to make a reference to that album. Again, with the instrumental here, it just sounds way more dynamic, way more fleshed out. And I think some of these tracks rest in a very steady pace that makes the whole song kind of sound like it's, you know, very samey from the start to finish. And this track just brings out something very, very electrifying in Sam's vocal performance, and it just brings out a new side to him that I just really enjoy. This is definitely the best track, and my God, I wish every other song on this album was of this caliber, because I'd be, you know, gushing over it. The track I is a weird one. Just don't really get why his vocals really like amp up, and he starts going really, he really goes for it with his vocals. Like, it sounds pretty good, but then the instrumental just stays the same. Nothing changes. And I'm just sat there thinking, why does he get more energetic and the song just sounds the same? Like, surely you'd expect the instrumental to build around him, and it doesn't. Just think that was a weird choice. And also some of the lyrics as well, where he's like, I'm not a liberal anymore. What are you, Dave Rubin in like a confessional video or something? I think he does a good job of like explaining his political stance, or the state of politics in the UK at the moment, or maybe even just the world at large, on Long Way Off, where he's talking about, you know, he hears so much shit from all sides of the political spectrum that he just can't really see a positive future, because there's just so many differing opinions that just clash all the time. And I think, you know, you can see why he might not be a liberal anymore based on that stance. But I just think he probably could have explained it a bit better on that track itself. But, you know, Long Way Off is pretty good. Pretty basic sort of, you know, opinions coming out here. But I can see why you'd become jaded with the way things have been, particularly in the UK and even the US, probably worse in the US for like however many years now. The internet is a dangerous place. You can go down the rabbit hole and find all kinds of opinions on so many things, and it just really does at points just make you kind of go, ah! But if you're an outsider to that and you're just, you know, trying to be pragmatic and keep a level head, I can see why you'd have this opinion that he has on this track. I know people are going to be very quick to be like, Sam Fender's a centrist, and probably in the comments like, Ryan's a centrist too. But come on, man, there's just so much stupidity that comes out of many areas of the political spectrum. You've got to understand why people get jaded. You just got to. You can't not understand why. It's so clear as to why. Spit of You is a pretty standard track where he's talking about, you know, someone looking like someone that he loved or whatever, and, you know, it reminds him too much of them. You've heard this before. Although I will say, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt of the fact that he says spit of you. And I think if you're outside of the UK, you might not necessarily know what that means, but like, there's this sort of saying, spitting image. It was even like a TV show for a while as well. And that's basically the same as saying like a doppelganger. I feel like that's the American equivalent. And I've never heard spit of you, like spitting image, being said in a song before. So it's kind of cool to hear that. But the general gist of the track isn't, you know, something you've never heard before. But I do really like his vocal performance on the majority of these tracks. Mantra, I think, is one of his best ones. He's going a bit more, you know, on this one, sounding very like, you know, 70s rock and roll. I wouldn't necessarily say the instrumental matches that, but the guitar tone on this track is so lovely that even though they do mismatch a little bit, I actually think it works quite well. So I'm pretty impressed with Sam on this track, being able to pull this off. You'd expect a heavier instrumental to go alongside his vocal approach here, but he doesn't do that, and I think it sounds quite good. So yeah, overall, an album that is resting too much on his influences to be anything, you know, that I can give beyond an album that's solid for what it's going for. But I just think he could probably try and carve out a bit more of a niche. I thought that with his debut as well. It was solid, but there wasn't anything that I never heard before on it. And I think Sam has potential to just kind of go one step further and be bolder with his music and try and give us something that is a bit more unique. Because like I say, 2 albums now, very much sounding like other artists. He's doing it well, like I can't complain at that, but I think there's one step further he can go to become a really good artist. A lot of Bruce on this album. I've mentioned The Killers and other artists too. You know, these are good comparisons because these artists have made good music in the past, but I still think there's a bit of a way to go for him. He's still pretty young, to be fair. He's not like, you know, in his like 50s or something doing this music. He's pretty young. I think there's potential for him. 6 out of 10 from me. Pretty good, pretty solid, and yeah, once again, pretty impressed with the Sam Fender album. So definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments if you've heard this album. If you haven't, check it out. Let me know your thoughts afterwards. What's your favourite track? What should I review next as well? Have a good day, subscribe, and goodbye.